Hello and welcome. I'm James Ezimoha and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. Trump says he will hold Iran responsible for Houthi attacks as tankers come under fire in the Red Sea. The EU targets Russian banks in a new sanctions package as 3 are killed in the latest strikes on Ukraine. And Azerbaijan's gas exports to Syria increases amid growing ties between the both countries. President Trump says he will hold Iran responsible for attacks launched by the Houthis in the Red Sea. On his Truth Social platform, Trump called the Yemeni militia a proxy of the Iranian regime. It comes after a 12th night of U.S. military strikes on Iran. Here's more.
The U.S. Central Command says American forces launched a 12th consecutive night of strikes against Iran. CENTCOM says the operation targeted Iran's maritime capabilities, missile and drone storage facilities, coastal surveillance sites, and air defense systems. U.S. President Donald Trump said Iran is not ready to make a deal. Speaking at a campaign rally in Marietta, Georgia, ahead of the 2026 U.S. midterm elections, Trump said Tehran was getting hit hard.
And the stock market has said, and that's with this skirmish we have going on. I call it a skirmish. This is with this skirmish we have with the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I call it that because, let me tell you, they're getting hit so hard, and they want to make a deal. But I say they're not ready to make a deal. Because every time they make a deal, they want to change it and everything. They're not ready. They'll be ready very soon.
He also renewed his threat to strike Iranian infrastructure, saying the United States would target a bridge or power plant every time Tehran attacks a ship in the Strait of Hormuz. Foreign Minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, said Iran's defense doctrine is eye for an eye. He warned that any aggression against Iran, including attacks on its infrastructure, would bring a powerful response, and that any country supporting such action would also be considered a legitimate target. Iran also said it carried out retaliatory drone strikes on US bases in Jordan and Bahrain, targeting troop facilities, equipment depots, and aircraft maintenance hangars. Early Thursday, the Iran-backed group the Houthis said they targeted 2 Saudi oil tankers, and maritime security reports said the Saudi flag tanker was hit in the Red Sea. Ship tracking data shows at least 7 oil tankers have reversed course near Yemen since the Houthis announced a maritime embargo on Saudi Arabia on Monday.
The U.S. Secretary of State has also hit out at the role of the Houthis. Marco Rubio says the escalation in the conflict now risks involving China.
You know, the Houthis largely were smart and stayed out of all this throughout the conflict, but they now apparently have gotten themselves suckered into this, going after Saudi Arabia and their ships. And by the way, that's, you know, I was reading reports a few hours ago that there was actually a Saudi fuel ship that's flagged Chinese. It's a Chinese ship. Are they going to blow up the Chinese ship and this becomes a problem for China? This will become a problem for the whole world. But I hope that will de-escalate, because I think the Houthis, frankly, got snookered into this thing by the Iranians, and they were smart to stay out of it, and they should stay out of it, and they should stop.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has warned it could take action over international law if its maritime interests in the Red Sea are threatened. Miriam Zia has more from Islamabad.
Pakistan has issued one of its strongest statements yet on the widening Middle East conflict. On Wednesday, the Foreign Office said any hostile act against Pakistani-flagged vessels or Pakistan's maritime interests would be considered a grave threat to national security. It added that Pakistan reserves the right to take all necessary measures, including lawful use of force, in line with the United Nations Charter and international law. The statement also condemned Houthi threats against Saudi Arabia and commercial shipping in the Red Sea. The warning comes days after Houthis announced a maritime embargo targeting Saudi Arabia. Pakistan's response is among the strongest issued by a non-Arab country since the threats emerged. On Thursday, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif spoke with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman on the phone, condemning the attacks in what he said were the strongest possible terms. He said the attacks violated international law, threatened freedom of navigation and commercial shipping, and reaffirmed Pakistan's complete solidarity with Saudi Arabia. He added that Pakistan, and I quote, stand firmly and resolutely with the Saudi leadership and the brotherly people of Kingdom at this critical time, unquote. The Prime Minister also said Pakistan would continue working closely with the Kingdom and international community to support regional security and the uninterrupted flow of lawful maritime commerce in the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz. For Pakistan, the stakes extend beyond diplomacy. The Bab al-Mandab Strait is a critical gateway for the country's trade and energy supplies, particularly after disruption to shipping through the Strait of Hormuz increased reliance on the Red Sea route for Saudi oil imports. A full closure of Bab al-Mandab could halt Saudi oil exports to Asia and reduce global oil supply by an estimated 7%. The warning signals that Islamabad now views security in the Red Sea as a direct strategic and economic interest, even though no Pakistani vessel has been targeted so far. Mariam Shah, A News, Islamabad.
Now, over in Iran, residents have been given their reaction to the ongoing fighting.
Anti-American sentiment is boiling over on the streets of Tehran as a fragile interim ceasefire with Washington unravels.
I don't think there's any need for us to sit down for talks or compromise anymore. Let the Strait of Hormuz be closed, let Bab al-Mandab be closed, and let what the axis of resistance is doing continue.
As diplomacy stalls, residents are warning that any US strike will ignite the entire region, directly placing neighbouring Arab states in the crosshairs.
Every country in the region has infrastructure. The Arab countries must understand that if our infrastructure is struck, theirs will certainly be struck as well. The Arabs in the region will certainly suffer.
Tehran residents insist Washington breached the 60-day understanding by enforcing new maritime corridors.
Our understanding was that we would manage it for 60 days. When they created another corridor, they effectively violated the understanding. The world needs to understand that.
As targeting civilian grids draws international warnings, the escalating standoff between Washington and Tehran threatens to turn the world's most vital oil choke point into an active war zone.
Now, Iraq's Prime Minister is visiting Iran, where he is scheduled to discuss bilateral relations. The trip comes amid unconfirmed reports on Baghdad's readiness to mediate between Iran and the US. Turaj Shivalulu has more.
Heading a delegation, Iraqi Premier Ali al-Zaidi has arrived in Tehran at the invitation of Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian for a two-day official visit. They will foster bilateral ties between the two neighboring countries during high-level meetings. The visit follows al-Zaidi's first foreign trip to the United States last week, fanning speculations that Baghdad may mediate between Iran and the US by hosting indirect ceasefire talks. The two countries share religious and trade bonds, as well as the 1,400-kilometer border. The relationship is despite previous fighting back in the 1980s, which lasted 8 years under Iraqi ruler Saddam Hussein, when the Islamic Republic was barely 2 years old following the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Last week, Iranian Minister of Information and Communications Technology, Sayyid Sattar Hashemi, visited Iraq to discuss the expansion of bilateral ties, as well as to review arrangements of the Arba'in Morning March in early August in the Iraqi city of Karbala. And earlier in July, Iraqi cities of Najaf and Karbala, home to shrines of the most revered Shia saints, Imam Ali and Imam Hussein, held a massive funeral for Iran's former supreme leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, and his family members who were killed in the Israeli-US air raids in February. Iraqi and Iranian officials, including Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, have said that the huge procession was a sign of solidarity between the two nations. The Iraqi Prime Minister's visit takes place ahead of a regional tour later in July, which according to his office will take him to two more neighboring countries, Turkey and Syria. At the age of 41, he is the youngest prime minister in the history of Iraq. At home, al-Zaidi has embarked on an anti-corruption campaign against former and in-office officials and lawmakers. Moreover, he is facing the challenging task of disarming the Iraqi militia and controlling the pro-Iran political parties that are against US influence in the post-Saddam Iraq. Turashir Alilu from Tehran for A News.
Now, the US and Saudi Arabia have signed a long-awaited nuclear agreement after years of negotiations. President Trump says the deal is conditional on the Gulf Kingdom joining the Abraham Accords to normalize ties with Israel and will rule out the enrichment of nuclear materials. However, some lawmakers have said they will oppose the plans.
A long-awaited civil nuclear agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia is now heading to Congress after being signed by senior officials from both countries. The pact allows the kingdom to build nuclear reactors using American technology, while also permitting Saudi Arabia to enrich uranium and reprocess nuclear waste, activities critics say are potential pathways to developing a nuclear weapon. US Secretary of Energy Chris Wright and Saudi Energy Minister Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman signed the agreement, known as a 1-2-3 agreement, alongside a bilateral safeguards accord. The US Energy Department says the deal complies with the non-proliferation requirements of the US Atomic Energy Act, describing them as among the world's strongest. However, unlike a proposal pursued during the Biden administration, the agreement does not include an additional protocol allowing the United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency to carry out intrusive snap inspections. The agreement now goes before Congress. Lawmakers have 90 session days to object, although overriding a presidential veto would require a 2/3 majority. Some nuclear experts and Democratic lawmakers are urging Congress to reject or amend the deal, warning it could increase the risk of nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. The agreement is expected to support the construction of AP1000 reactors over about 30 years in a project worth tens of billions of dollars, benefiting Westinghouse. An industry source says feasibility studies and the pace of nuclear development mean it could still take years before the necessary infrastructure is in place.
All right, after the break, the ASEAN summit wraps up in Manila with calls for international shipping routes to be safeguarded. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Now, foreign ministers from Southeast Asia are calling for freedom of navigation in international straits to be safeguarded as they wrap up a week of meetings in the Philippines. The renewed fighting between the US and Iran in the Persian Gulf has dominated much of the debate in Manila. Laura Westbrook reports.
Many countries in Southeast Asia, including traditional US allies like the Philippines, are feeling the economic strain from the Iran war, as they are heavily dependent on oil and gas from the Middle East. Philippine Foreign Minister Maria Teresa Lazaro says the meetings have taken place against a backdrop of profound geopolitical and geoeconomic uncertainty, and that nations cannot address the complex environment alone. Renewed strikes by Washington and Tehran have intensified after an interim ceasefire deal collapsed. Speaking to reporters, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio accused Tehran of reneging on agreements, but said that he believed Iran would make a deal soon as they continue to experience losses. Rubio also held talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. According to Russia's foreign ministry, Lavrov warned Washington against making unacceptable arms deliveries to Ukraine. He also reiterated that the Russian side was ready for a political and diplomatic settlement of the conflict. Rubio called the conversation with Lavrov frank and says that Washington was prepared to take a constructive role to end the Ukraine war.
We want a peace deal. We want the war to end. We're prepared to play whatever positive role we can to end the war. And that, in order to end this war, will require something that both Russia and Ukraine can agree to.
Tensions in the South China Sea are also in focus amid another confrontation between the Philippines and China. China claims almost all the South China Sea, but there are competing maritime sovereignty claims from other countries, including the Philippines. China's top diplomat Wang Yi says the South China Sea was our common home and where peace and stability rested in the hands of all. It comes as ASEAN members have long sought to agree a shared code of conduct with China for the sea and critical waterway. Laura Westbrook for A News in Hong Kong.
Now, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has told his counterpart, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, that continued Western weapons deliveries to Ukraine are unacceptable to Moscow. The two met on the sidelines of ASEAN talks in Manila. The meeting lasted around 40 minutes and centered on efforts to end the war in Ukraine. According to Russian media, Lavrov reaffirmed Moscow's support for proposals discussed during the Alaska negotiations. Now, 3 people have been killed and at least 10 injured in the latest Russian strikes on Ukraine. The authorities say the explosion caused a fire at a food business in the eastern city of Polarov. As Moscow accelerates its offensive, Russian forces claim to have captured a town in Donetsk alongside new advances in Kharkiv and Zaporizhia. In response, Kyiv launched heavy long-range strikes deep inside Russia, hitting a military drone logistics hub and targeting enemy cargo ships in the Black Sea. President Volodymyr Zelensky said a new trilateral meeting involving Ukraine, Russia and the United States should take place before autumn. During a joint news conference with Irish Prime Minister in Kyiv, he said the proposals had been discussed with U.S. Special Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner.
They will share their ideas with us. We will have a meeting. I think they want to share their ideas with us and the Russians. I don't know yet when this meeting will take place. I think that most likely we can have a meeting in the United States of America, with the Americans, of course.
Now, the European Union has agreed on a new package of sanctions targeting Russian banks as the war in Ukraine continues. William Denslow has more.
The European Union's top diplomat Kaja Kallas has described this as the largest sanctions package on Russia since its full-scale invasion of Ukraine 4 years ago. 218 listings are included in this package, ranging from entities from the banking and crypto sectors, as well as entities in the military-industrial base. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, also says that for the first time, vessels associated with assisting Russia's shadow fleet will also be included. Now, while much focus from European leaders is on what's in this sanctions package, there's plenty of controversy as to what is not included. This package was first tabled in early June. Since then, it's been subject to weeks of fierce diplomatic wrangling here in Brussels amongst the EU's 27 member states. Examples of what's not included in this package: a ban on Russian fisheries. This reportedly after it was blocked by the likes of Portugal and Germany. Perhaps most significantly is announcement that there has been a compromise when it comes to Greece's position and their veto, that they were unhappy with a ban on the transport of Russian LNG, liquefied natural gas, being shipped from Russia to third-party non-EU member states. Athens, as holding the largest commercial fleet, worried about the financial implications of such a move that was set to take effect in January 2027. Now, a compromise has been met, which means that with these exemptions, it means that LNG will allow to be shipped to these non-EU member states as long as contracts were concluded before the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of 2022. Significantly, what has been agreed as well is a price cap on Russian oil for another 12 months, keeping it at a base rate of $44 per barrel. Ursula von der Leyen says that is significant. It means, she says, that the Russian war machine won't benefit from any potential future oil market shocks. William Denslow for A News, Brussels.
Joining us now is Andrei Dobransky, policy expert at the Center of U.S.-Ukrainian Relations in New York. Good to have you, sir.
Thank you for having me on.
Now, what makes this agreement different from previous European support for Ukraine?
Well, there's a lot of elements that have been covered, including the expansion of sanctions regarding third parties. Also, very notably, that cut out for grandfathered agreements, basically Greece being the main proponent of these third country liquefied natural gas suppliers with contracts that have been signed prior to 2022, and it was basically a technical disagreement that had to be resolved within the EU. There are also elements that portend about the subsequent package, the 22nd package that could come in, including concrete steps towards banning personnel that have participated on behalf of the Russian military in invading Ukraine from entering the European Union. This has been a sticking point for a lot of countries, and it's finally coming to the fore, and I anticipate that the 22nd package could come out as late as later this year.
Now, what does this funding actually buy Ukraine that military aid alone cannot?
Well, the important thing is to target the areas of the Russian economy that have been propping up the development of their military and the continued assault against Ukraine. So part of the language included formalizing language that had been used with the SWIFT banking system against older systems, and kind of rectifying the way that cutouts have been used, including crypto, as had been mentioned in the report, as well as other ways of getting around sanctions, like updating the list of ships with foreign flags that Russia had been using for their illicit sales. So this is why we've had 21 packages from the EU, less so from the United States, but these constant updates need to happen. Otherwise, it's what we describe as whack-a-mole, using the carnival term of trying to jump and hit the mole coming out of the right hole. Otherwise, Russia will keep on changing the flags of its ships, keep on changing the cutout firms it uses to make money that supplies the infrastructure for its war.
Mm-hmm. Now, could this agreement then change Russia's expectations about Europe's support for Ukraine?
No, I think Russia is looking at leaning on smaller countries, including Romania, Moldova, Poland, with some interscene discussions about policy towards Ukraine until they can get to 2027. 2027 is really the year that Russia is aiming to survive until, prolong its war against Ukraine until 27, because as of the beginning of 27, we have the German presidential elections, we have President Macron in France being term limited out, and Marine Le Pen being added back onto the ballot, as well as a potential all-country vote in the United Kingdom after the change of its prime minister. And if one of those E3, as they're called, countries has a change of leadership that could be leaned towards a more amicable policy for Russia, Russia thinks that is what they need to hang out for.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about the 90 billion euro loan. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, this goes in line with a lot of the policy that have been proposed in the previous packages of support for Ukraine. The great thing about this loan is that a lot of it can be backed by Russian assets currently in the EU. That's not just financial assets, that could be real estate assets. Russia has parked a lot of its reserves in Europe, propping up European economies to some sort, but also the fact that that money exists and could be confiscated has been a topic of discussion since the very beginning of this conflict. And hopefully that means that in the end, neither the European Union nor Ukraine will be saddled with a large bill here, since we know that not only do these assets exist to be confiscated, but also the earnings of these assets can be confiscated while it continues to mature.
Right, so this is a lot of money we're talking about. Where will ordinary Ukrainians notice this support first?
There's a lot that's being done as far as floating the Ukrainian government in general. The main problem here is we're talking about a country that has been isolated by Russia from reviving its economy in many ways. The chief way being that without this European supplement of money for industry, etc., we still do not have local level monies distributed around. We would have had scores, millions of tourist visitors visiting Ukraine on a regular basis since 2022. But with the lack of flights, with the lack of safety, people not wanting to spend their vacation in a Ukrainian ski resort, which would generally be cheaper than other ski resorts, but this local economy, where you have a lot of cash economy, where you have money filtering into the local level, that has been missing in Ukraine for the last 4 years, which is why so many of these loan agreements have come to make sure that the Ukrainian government can subsist during this period. And that's going to be a problem for the future as well. We're talking about a country that has not had flights into it. So even to get that process rolling will take approximately 6 to 9 months just to open up a single airport. Think of that for the economy of any country, especially one that's located so centrally within the heart of Europe, to try to revive economy. This is why these loan agreements end up being more economical in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Now, that said, what is the biggest challenge Ukraine still faces that money alone cannot solve?
It's on the battlefield, and it's something that Ukraine has been pushing for 4 years, for these last 40 days to make a big push. Ukraine, I mentioned earlier that Russia wants to survive until 27 to try to see if they can get a better handle on one of the E3 countries in terms of a change of position towards Russia. Ukraine, on the other hand, is really pushing, along with the United States, along with the European Union, that they want to come to some sort of end of this conflict this year. That includes not just military operations within Ukraine. We're seeing the increase of longer range strikes, really striking at the heart of not just the Russian economy as far as its oil-based facilities, but also its ability to manufacture these long-range drones that have been targeting not just Ukraine, but now crossing over into European territory as well. So Ukraine is going to increase those kind of, as they call it, their own version of sanctions, which are targeted strikes with drones deep into the heart of Russia. But that at the same time, they work alongside with the European partners to increase the sanctions, which makes renovating those facilities even harder. And that, in the end, is about pushing President Putin to the negotiating table, something that he has refused to do since the beginning of this conflict, as opposed to President Zelensky, who has flown to literally 5 countries at the request of President Trump in anticipation of some kind of sit-down with the Russians.
Mm-hmm. That brings me to my next question. Talks seem to have started, especially between the US and Russia. Are you hopeful we could see an end to all of this?
I am hopeful because the Ukrainians are increasing their diplomatic push as well. However, we need to understand that there are multilateral spheres of influence here that are being discussed. Russia is feeling that it has been pushed out of more countries in South America than it's comfortable with. They had already lost their Mediterranean port with the change of government in Syria. And there are many other regions where they have had influence. Most notably, the United States has now changed its policy towards Mali in Africa, a region where Russia had been sending its troops on a constant basis in mercenary format to influence the local economy and local warlords. This is a problem that is part of the conversation that was happening in ASEAN outside of the European issue and specifically the Ukrainian issue. So when Russia is dealing with the United States is proving that it can handle itself on a multivectoral, multilateral plane and not just have the conversation about Ukraine, which is a distinct difference than what we had from the beginning of the war and the invasion of Crimea in 2014. Russia has been able to dominate any conversation with the West as far as what the conversation is. What are we negotiating over? And it's always been Russia dictating the field of battle. We see Ukraine changing the field of battle by having longer range drones target deep within Russia. No place in Russia is safe now from a Ukrainian attack, as well as the fact that the United States and its partners are now looking to readjust Russia's influence throughout the world. And that is the only way you put pressure on on Russia to end this war.
That was Andrei Dubransky, policy expert at the Center for U.S.-Ukrainian Relations, joining us from New York. Good to have you, sir.
Thank you.
Now, Greece is expected to approve plans for a $4 billion air defense system from Israel shortly. Athens says new drone technology will form the core of the deal. Using Israeli radar and missile technology, the plan is to create an anti-ballistic and anti-aircraft system named the Achilles Shield. The country's Security Council is also buying up to 40 new F-35 fighter jets from the US, along with frigates from France and Italy. Greece plans to spend around $32 billion on modernizing its military over the next decade, saying the country has entered a new era. We'll be back after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Now, Turkey and Syria have pledged to increase bilateral trade volumes to $10 billion as economic ties between the two countries continue to deepen. It comes as Ankara seeks to position Turkish businesses in Syria's post-Assad economic recovery. Adam Moran reports from Istanbul.
Turkish Trade Minister Ömer Bolat says Turkey and Syria aim to increase bilateral trade to $10 billion as quickly as possible, as economic ties between the two neighbors continue to deepen. Bolat made the announcement after meeting Kutayba Bedoui, head of Syria's customs authority, on the sidelines of a trade and investment forum held at the Turkish Trade Ministry in Ankara. According to Bolat, bilateral trade reached a record $3.7 billion last year. The meeting reportedly focused on easing customs procedures, reviewing tariffs, accelerating work by a joint customs committee, and improving cooperation at border crossings. Ankara also wants to expand commercial activity across the entire Turkey-Syria border, with particular emphasis on the Gaziantep-Aleppo corridor, historically one of the region's most important trade routes. The push comes as Turkey seeks to play a leading role in Syria's economic recovery and reconstruction after years of conflict and political instability. Since the end of Assad's rule in late 2024, trade ties between the two countries have expanded rapidly, with steadily increasing border commerce, logistics, and investment activity. Turkish firms are also positioning themselves to take part in infrastructure, manufacturing, and energy projects in Syria as the latter looks to rebuild its shattered economy. For Ankara, closer economic integration is also viewed as a means of supporting regional stability and improving living conditions on both sides of the border. Bolat said that Turkey was working closely with the Syrian authorities to remove long-standing obstacles to trade and unlock what Ankara sees as significant untapped commercial potential. Reaching the $10 billion target would represent a major acceleration of bilateral economic ties and further cement Turkey's role as one of Syria's key trading partners. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Meanwhile, Azerbaijan exported more than 418 million cubic meters of natural gas to Syria in the first 5 months of this year. According to the Azerbaijan's State Statistics Committee, the value stood at around $140.7 million. Overall, Azerbaijan exported more than 10 billion cubic meters of natural gas worth more than $3 billion to 8 countries between January and May. The total export volume was slightly higher than the same period last year, increasing by about 110 million cubic meters. Joining us now is Ulviya Zulfikar, a political analyst, joining us from Baku, Azerbaijan. Good to have you, ma'am.
Good evening. Thank you for having me on your show.
Now, why is Syria becoming an important market for Azerbaijani gas?
I think Syria is important not primarily because of the immediate size of the market, but because of the strategic context in which Azerbaijani gas is entering that market. Syria is emerging from years of conflict with severely damaged electricity and energy infrastructure. So without reliable electricity, it's impossible to restart factories, hospitals, public services, or any normal economic activity. So Azerbaijan gas therefore addresses one of the most urgent requirements of Syria's recovery, and the project has already moved beyond political declarations. Azerbaijan gas supplies to Syria through Turkey, which began in August 2025. And the initial plan, I think, envisaged approximately 1.2 billion cubic meters annually, with the possibility of increasing the volume. So the gas is being used to support electricity generation at Syrian power plants, meaning that its effect is felt directly in the daily lives of ordinary people. So for Azerbaijan, Syria is also significant because it demonstrates geographical flexibility. Azerbaijan has traditionally been associated with supplies to Georgia, Turkey, and European markets. Syria shows that Azerbaijani gas can also reach markets to the south and south through existing partnerships and interconnected infrastructure. So I would describe Syria as both a commercial market and a strategic market. The volumes may still be smaller than Azerbaijan's European exports, but the political and humanitarian significance is much greater than the numbers alone suggest.
Now, how does supplying Syria fit into Azerbaijan's broader gas export strategy?
I think energy cooperation is probably the strongest practical foundation on which the relationship can currently be, rebuilt. Political statements are important, but relations become sustainable when countries create projects that serve the interests of both sides. The gas agreements gives Azerbaijan-Syria relations a concrete economic dimension from the very beginning. And this is practically important because bilateral relations are being renewed in a completely different regional environment. So during the previous Syrian government, relations didn't realize their full potential. So today, both sides are trying to open a new chapter, and energy cooperation allows them, to do that without waiting for every political question to be resolved first. And President Hamayev and Syria's transitional leadership have repeatedly highlighted the importance of Azerbaijani gas for Syria's energy security and overall development. And energy cooperation, I think, can therefore function as a confidence-building mechanism. Once institutions, companies, and officials begin working together successfully in one sector, it becomes easier to extend that cooperation into other areas.
Now, speaking about that cooperation, could Syria become a long-term energy partner, or is this mainly a response to its immediate needs?
At present, the project is clearly responding to an immediate need. Syria urgently requires food to regenerate electricity and restore basic economic activity. And much of its infrastructure has been damaged. Domestic production remains constrained, and the population needs more reliable access to power. So the short-term humanitarian and reconstruction dimensions should not be underestimated. And however, an emergency arrangement can develop into a long-term partnership if three conditions are met. For example, political stability in Syria, reliable financing, and continued development of the necessary infrastructure. So if these conditions, I think, improve, Syria will require energy not only for households, but also for industry construction. And my assessment is that Syria could become a stable, medium-sized market for Azerbaijani gas. It's unlikely to replace, of course, or rival Europe in volume, and that is not the objective, but it could become a reliable part of a diversified regional portfolio, and especially if reconstruction progress and bilateral economic relations deepen.
Now that leads me to my next question. Europe remains Azerbaijan's largest gas customer. How does Syria then complement that rather than compete with it?
For my opinion, Europe and Syria represent completely different categories of demand. Europe is Azerbaijan's principal high volume and long-term export market, and European customers are seeking diversification of supply, predictable contracts, and alternatives to traditional sources. Syria, on the other hand, is currently seeking enough fuel to restore electricity generation and rebuild basic services. So the scale is also different. In the first half of 2026, Azerbaijan exported, I think, for my opinion, 5.9 billion cubic meters of gas to Europe, and compared with 0.7 billion cubic meters to Syria. So Syria is not competing with Europe for the central position in Azerbaijan's export strategy. It's complementing the European direction by adding another regional destination. And it's also important to remember that export policy is not based simply on dividing a fixed amount of gas among customers. And Azerbaijan is working to increase production, improve infrastructure, and develop additional fields. So future export capacity will depend on investments and productions growth as well as demand. And politically, I think serving both markets strengthens Azerbaijan's image. In Europe, Azerbaijan is viewed as a contributor to energy diversification. In Syria, it's contributing to reconstruction and regional stabilization. And these roles reinforce one another because both demonstrate that Azerbaijan is capable of acting as a reliable supplier under very different conditions.
All right. Ms. Zulfikar, finally, where do you see the greatest potential for Azerbaijan to expand its energy partnerships?
For my opinion, in the short and medium term, the greatest additional potential remains in the southern Europe, the Balkans and Central Europe. And several countries in those regions want to diversify their gas supplies. And this vision already has the political credibility and part of the infrastructure needed to expand its presence here. The second direction, I think the wider Middle East, Syria, the first important example, but future opportunities could emerge elsewhere depending on infrastructure. The third area, I think, this Central Asia, Azerbaijan can strengthen its position not only as an exporter of its own resources, but also as a transit and connectivity state for energy. And for the biggest long-term opportunity, I think maybe renewable energy. Azerbaijan is developing wind and solar capacity and participating in projects intended to carry, green electricity toward Turkey and Europe. So therefore, I think Azerbaijan's future energy role should not be understood only in terms of natural gas. The country is gradually positioning itself as a wider energy and connectivity partner, linking the Caspian, Europe, Turkey, Central Asia, and the Middle East.
That was Ulviya Zulfikar, political analyst, joining us from Baku. Thank you for your time, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Now, China says demand in its shipbuilding industry has continued to lead the global market in the first half of 2026. That's according to data released by the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology on Thursday. Green and low-carbon vessels have emerged as a key growth area for the country's industry. In the first half of this year, the country's shipbuilding completion volume reached 36.5 million deadweight tons, up 5.1% year-on-year. Afghanistan and Uzbekistan have discussed advancing a major railway project aimed at strengthening regional trade and connectivity. The proposed Afghan Trans Railway would connect Uzbekistan with Pakistan through Afghanistan, creating a new regional trade and transit corridor. Here's more.
Afghanistan and Uzbekistan are seeking to accelerate railway cooperation with talks focusing on the Afghan Trans Railway project and increased movement of commercial goods between the two countries. Afghanistan's Deputy Minister for Railways at the Ministry of Public Works, Muhammad Ishaq Sahibzada, travelled to Uzbekistan at the head of a technical delegation where he met Uzbekistan's Director General for Railways. According to Afghanistan's Ministry of Public Works, the discussions focused on launching feasibility studies for the Afghan Trans Railway, which is expected to connect Uzbekistan with Pakistan through Afghan territory. The two sides had also discussed transferring the Herat Mazar Sharif railway survey documents to Kabul, developing branch lines and increasing rail freight transportation. The ministry said both sides emphasized the need to strengthen bilateral railway cooperation, expand trade links, and provide greater facilities for traders and investors. The Afghan Trans Railway is a major regional project that would connect Central Asia with Pakistani ports through Afghanistan. However, feasibility studies, funding, and coordination among the participating countries are still needed before construction can begin. The latest discussions come as Afghanistan seeks to expand its railway network and strengthen trade and transit connections with Central Asia and other regional markets. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, iNews.
To other news now, Google has been fined 890 million euros by the European Union for breaching rules aimed at curbing the power of major tech companies. The EU says Google favored its own services in search results and blocked app developers from directing users to cheaper offers outside the Google Play Store. The company has 60 days to comply or face further penalties. Google says it is considering an appeal, but EU officials defended the decision, saying the rules are designed to prevent dominant online platforms from disadvantaging smaller rivals.
Google claims that we're degrading products or blocking American companies from innovate or operate in the EU. It's the opposite. Let me allow to set the record straight on this one. The current situation is that you have gatekeepers who are blocking European innovation, and you have gatekeepers who are blocking European companies to compete and innovate fairly. So what we're asking Google with these fines is to get into compliance with the DMA and to offer a level playing field, at least in the European Union.
Now, US President Donald Trump has warned that the federal government could face another shutdown in September as partisan differences over federal spending persist. It's despite Congress moving ahead with a short-term funding measure to keep government operations running beyond the end of the fiscal year.
Because you're going to have a stoppage. You're going to have a stoppage in September. The Democrats won't approve everything. They become deranged, like deranged Jack Smith. Remember that deranged sick puppy? They're deranged, and they won't approve. You're going to have a shutdown in September. And in 2 years later, you have the debt ceiling bill. They would love it. I call it the 1929. You know what 1929 means? That was not a good year. And there's no reason for it. They should terminate the filibuster. Everybody call John Thune at the Senate. He's the leader of the Republican Party, and tell him to get this stuff approved.
All right, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.